Hello and welcome to Current Affairs on JTV. Today we have a very special broadcast show for you with Senator Tim Kaine, who is a former governor of Virginia, the current sitting junior senator for Virginia, and of course was Hillary Clinton's running mate in the 2016 presidential election. Senator, thank you so much for joining me from your office in Washington today. Now, the big news, of course, currently is the president's decision not to recertify the Iran nuclear deal, which you have obviously worked on in the Senate and have had some knowledge of in the past. Now, I'm going to guess that you're not agreeing with the president's decision to do this, but do you think there is any merit in some of the things that he has mentioned he would like to see in terms of Iran complying with?
I actually, Alan, think it's a big mistake what the president is doing. And first, to set the stage, Congress just passed unanimously a big Iran sanctions bill that we put on the president's desk in August. So we're very mindful of Iranian misbehavior in the region, human rights violations of UN Security Council resolutions on their missile program. And we've just given the president significant power to take action against those challenges. But here's the problem with the Iran nuclear deal, what the president is doing with it. The IAEA, the international agency charged with enforcing it, says that Iran is complying. Our national security professionals in the United States, the Secretary of Defense, General Mattis, General Dunford, the head of our Joint Chiefs of Staff, our Secretary of State, they say Iran is complying. And our allies say Iran is complying. So what the president is doing, together with other actions, is sort of taking a step back from American diplomatic commitment when the world says that Iran is complying with this deal. And in my visits to Israel, when I visit with intelligence and national security professionals there, they say not only that Iran is complying, but that it is making Israel safer in the short and medium term. So I think there's big danger in the U.S. backing away from a deal when there's a consensus that Iran is complying with it. And if the president says, well, look, we'd like to renegotiate pieces of it, sunsets of certain, limitations that happen 8 or 10 or 15 years out, we want to renegotiate those. Iran's going to renegotiate too. So what are they going to want? Do they want some of their enriched uranium back? Do they want to have some centrifuges back? I don't want to give Iran anything. I want them to have to live up to this deal. They are living up to it. That is an important national security measure. And so I think with respect to Iran and the U.S. commitment to diplomacy, this is a big mistake. But one other thing that makes it particularly problematic, we're trying to do a nuclear deal with North Korea right now. And North Korea isn't about 8 or 10 or 13 years down the road. North Korea is about what might happen this month.
Well, it's in the road. It's there. It's there already. Now, I take your point.
I'm sorry?
I take your point. Obviously, this is a major issue in terms of diplomacy, but it isn't the first time that people have attempted to renegotiate or change deals. I mean, if you recall, President Carter, put through SALT II or tried to put that through. President Reagan didn't like that particularly and wanted a different sort of regime in place. It took a long time to get there. But it's surely not wrong for a president to be able to say, I don't necessarily agree with what my predecessor is doing, and I'm giving it to Congress now to work it out.
Well, it's not necessarily wrong. That was a bilateral treaty, but this is a multinational deal. And again, you've got to put it in the context of we just gave the president more tools to sanction Iran, and the global community in this multilateral deal says Iran is complying with it. I think, I'll be blunt, the president has done a number of things I disagree with. This is the first thing he's done that actually I find sort of frightening. I have a child in the military. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. Together with cutting the State Department budget, demeaning the efforts of our diplomats when they try to engage in negotiations, not filling key diplomatic posts, the president is undermining and weakening America's diplomatic muscle. And if you do that, you raise the risk of unnecessary war. And I think that's what the president is doing in this case.
Now, I understand, again, the points you've made there, but he was pretty open on the campaign trail about his view of the Iran deal. Is there not a case for saying the American people essentially endorsed his position by electing him president?
I certainly am not hearing that from Virginians. I live in probably the most military state in the country in terms of not only our installations, but the number of active duty, Guard, Reserve, veteran military families. I am not hearing from my citizens that we should take a step back and renegotiate this deal. In fact, the major newspaper in my state that opposed the deal when it came out, opined over the weekend that, but look, Iran is complying with the deal. Even if we didn't like it, the U.S. shouldn't be stepping back because it raises questions about whether you can trust the U.S. on a diplomatic matter. Again, if there had been some suggestion by the IAEA or the international community that Iran wasn't complying with the nuclear deal, it would be completely different. But when our Secretary of Defense testifies in open testimony to the Armed Services Committee that Iran is complying with the deal and it's in our national security interest, I think stepping back from it at all it's a big mistake. It takes the focus off Iranian behavior and puts it on America's good faith.
I get that. So essentially your objection is one of process. It's not necessarily about the issues. I mean, I presume you would agree that there are concerns about Iran's ballistic missile program. I think you'd agree, as you stated, there are concerns about Iran's terrorism issues and sort of issues of the Revolutionary Guards as well. But it's a process that matters.
Well, I would say it's more than the process. On the substance of non-nuclear issues, I have been tough on Iran. On the substance of the nuclear deal, Iran is complying with the deal, and there is a consensus about that. And so, if you walk away from a deal that has pushed the Iranian nuclear program away from weapons, you run the risk that Iran will return to developing nuclear weapons. And again, we're trying to do a nuclear deal with North Korea right now. I don't think the chances are high about that. I would say they're 20% at most. But why drive the chances to 0%? If North Korea doesn't think the U.S. will honor a deal once made, the chances of them doing a deal are virtually nil. And again, the Iran question is about what happens in year 8 or 15 or 20. The North Korea question is about what might happen in the next 2 weeks. And we shouldn't be weakening our diplomatic efforts at the very time we're trying to find a solution.
I agree with you, but surely you can't believe that North Koreans can be trusted on any deal, given their past behavior with diplomatic negotiations.
They wouldn't do a deal just with the United States. I agree with you on that. But obviously, this is a multinational discussion. And there is a circumstance, and again, I would probably put it at a 20% likelihood. There's a circumstance where, with China's strong leverage, we could find a deal with North Korea that would end or dramatically limit any nuclear weapons ambitions they have. I don't think that chance is high, Alan, but there is a chance. And as you know, I've had to cast 2 votes in the Senate for war authorizations already in my time in the Senate. Hardest vote you'll ever cast. I always want to be able to say, have we exhausted diplomatic alternatives? So, for example, you have our diplomats now saying, we're trying to see if there's a diplomatic solution to this. But the president then tweets out, diplomacy won't work. It's a waste of time. We don't even have an ambassadorial nominee from the president to South Korea, which is a huge mistake. We shouldn't be taking steps to undermine or exclude the possibility of diplomatic resolution. And that's why the Iran action of the president is actually connected to the North Korean situation.
One last question. You are, of course, a senator for Virginia. You're a former governor of Virginia. And, of course, worldwide, we were treated the spectacle of Charlottesville, what happened in your state, and the reaction of the president. So I'm going to ask you straight up, it may be a hard question, is President Trump a racist?
Is President
Trump a racist?
Look, I don't know President Trump, and I will never make an accusation like that if I don't know the person individually. But I will say this. President Trump had no problem when a Somali individual ran a car into a crowd in Columbus, Ohio, when he was the president-elect in last December. He called it terrorism, and he flew to Columbus to comfort those who had been injured. When somebody who was of Middle Eastern background drove a car into a crowd on the Ramblas in Barcelona, he called it terrorism immediately. And so here, 90 miles from the national capital, when a white supremacist, an avowed white supremacist, drives a car into a crowd, killing a beautiful 32-year-old woman, injuring 19 people, he says there's good people on both sides. That moral confusion about something right at his doorstep absolutely infuriated Virginians. This was a rally of white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and others. Those who have been arrested for violence overwhelmingly came from outside Virginia. And the fact that the president wouldn't call out that behavior until we forced him to. Congress passed a resolution requiring him to condemn the behavior that got on his desk, and he had to sign it. It just shows that I think there's a moral vacuum in the White House. That's what we have right now.
Okay, and just one quick follow-up. I note that you stressed, of course, President Trump calls certain things terrorism, maybe not others. Isn't that the flip side of the previous President Obama, who refused to call radical Islamist terrorism for what it was? Refused to use those words.
He always called out terrorism.
But he didn't call it by what it was. He refused to say it.
President Obama had a concern that's actually shared by a number of the Trump administration national security team, which is if you focus on Islam, then you demean a religion that is ultimately not about terrorism, and you don't want to paint with a broad brush. I think all of us in politics should avoid painting with the broad brush. We should try to use the narrow brushes, and you don't want to tarnish a religion that is overwhelmingly peaceful by continuing to focus on that. That was President Obama's view, a view that was shared by people like the Secretary of Defense, General McMaster, and others. And I understand that view, but President Obama didn't have trouble calling terrorism terrorism.
Senator, thank you so much for your time. That's all we have time for today. Please do join us again for another episode of Current Affairs on JTV.